Hi everybody, Brandy here doing my comments for my Stampin' Studio today. Today I'm going to show you how to create a acetate stencil using your Silhouette cutting machine. Recently I was asked by the folks over at scrapbook.com to come up with a card design using one of their new exclusive products that just launched yesterday, in fact. They are now going to be selling digital cut files. And digital cut files are the files that you use in your Cricut machines and your Silhouette machines to create different designs. And I was really excited when they asked me to do this because I love to use my machine to create my cards. Now, a lot of the folks that were asked to create different cards, they used their Silhouette or their Cricut machines to basically cut out of cardstock, whatever the design was. And I decided I wanted to do something a little different this time. I wanted to experiment with using that cut file to create a stencil, because I wanted to use the stencil to be able to blend ink on top of it and come out with a different type of card. And so what I thought is I'd share with you all the process that I go through in order to do that. Now, this was my first time making a stencil with my craft machine, or my cutting machine, and I thought you all might benefit from the process as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you in this video a screenshot, basically, or screen share I should say, of all the steps that I did to create the file and to prep it for my cutting machine. I'll also show you the actual cutting itself and how I did a test run, and then the final product, or final project. Once I had the stencil cut out, then I'll show you the card example that I used to actually make it. So, all right, let's get started. Okay, so I think we need to talk a little bit about cut files and what exactly are they. You may have heard the term SVG, and SVG is a file type that you can use with your Cricut and your Silhouette Studio if you have the designer version. Now, I do not have the designer version of Silhouette Studio. I just have the basic edition, but nevertheless, I'm still able to use the SVG file, and I'm going to show you how I prep the file in order to bring it into Silhouette Studio. I'm going to be using Adobe Illustrator to import my SVG file that I get from scrapbook.com. And then I'm going to export it as a DXF file, which is a digital cut file. And that is the file type that I'm going to use with my basic edition of Silhouette Studio. Now, if you have the designer version of Silhouette Studio, the designer version of Silhouette Studio, you could probably just import your SVG, no problem. But if you have a basic edition, you may have to do a little bit extra work, and that is to convert your SVG into a DXF file format, and then you can use it into your Studio basic edition. Now, I use Adobe Illustrator. There may be other programs out there on the internet that you don't have to pay for Adobe Illustrator, but I have basically the Creative Cloud suite, and that I use all of their products pretty much. The Lightroom, the Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, which is what I'm using to edit this video, and then Illustrator to do some design work in. So I'll put a link down below if you're interested in learning where you can get your access to the Adobe Creative Suite. Alright, so let's jump in, and I'm going to flip the camera over and let you take a look at my computer and show you everything that I did to create this project. So I'm in AI or Adobe Illustrator right now, and I'm just going to click open, and then I will go to where I have saved the files, and I'm going to go into the card section, and I'm going to choose the Floral Card Front, and you will notice that it's an SVG file, and this is what the file looks like. And I'm going to just click open, and then that's going to open into Adobe Illustrator. And once I'm here, all I'm going to do is go File, export, export as, and then I'm going to change the format from SVG to the AutoCAD interchange file DXF. I've already done this, so I'm not going to go ahead and export it, but that's what you would do. You would choose where you want to save it and then hit export. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel out of that, and then I'm going to close Illustrator. And then I'm going to go into Adobe. Let me just open up a new file. All right, so what we need to do is we need to bring in the cut file, which I have converted to DXF. Now, if you have the designer edition of Silhouette Studio, you don't have to do this extra step. But I don't design enough in Silhouette, so it didn't warrant paying for that that fee. So the little workaround that I've just shown you is basically what to do if you don't have the designer edition and you have an SVG file that you want to cut in your Silhouette. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open that DXF file that I cut. Let's see, where did I put it? Yep, I've got it right there. I'm going to hit OK. Now this process will take probably about a minute because there are so many bits and pieces to this cut file, this DXF file, that it takes a little bit to open. So I'm just going to sit here and wait for it to open, but I'm going to actually cut it short in the video so you don't have to sit here and watch the screen basically do nothing for about a minute. All right, and here is the cut file that has loaded in, and if you click on any of the parts you will see that it is all separate little bits and pieces. Be careful doing that though, you don't want to actually move something like that, and if you do accidentally do that, just go Control or Command Z, depending on whether you're on a Mac or a PC. Now this particular file type is a little large for a card front, so I'm going to need to resize it. And before I do that, I want to take a look at some other options here. I want to make sure that my cutting mat, I'm actually going to be cutting it on a 12x12 Cameo, and I'll make sure that that is set there. And then my media size, this is the size of paper that I'm going to cut it with, and if I were to change this, you will see how that kind of changes in size. The particular piece of paper that I'm going to have is 8.5 by 11, so I'm just going to change that back. Now also notice the orientation of the way that cut media, or that media, is on the Cameo mat. If I were to change this dimension and do the width by 11 and the height by 8.5, you'll notice that it has changed the way it shows up on the mat. But I typically do it the other way, so I'm just going to shoot it. I'm just going to go back. This will just mean that you need to be careful about the way you put your acetate paper on the media mat and which direction you're going to be putting it. If you were to change it and the cut lines are outside of this white area, that's actually not going to cut because it's going to be outside the media size that you have set. Alright, so now I want to take all of this and reduce it down to a card front size. So I am going to select all of it, and I can either go up to Object and Group, or I can right click and group. And so now all of this is going to be moving around together. Next thing I want excuse me, next thing I want to do is come over here and click on the Transform panel. By default, this screen shows up, but I want to change it to the scale, and to specify the dimension is this in particular what I'm looking for. I'm going to go ahead and click this lock button just to make sure that my dimensions are going to be going together. So I'm going to choose the height, and I know the height of the card that, or the cut file that I want is 5.25. It's 5 1/4. And then I'm going to hit apply, and then it automatically excuse me, oops, I did that backwards. Let me change that. 5.25. There we go. And so it automatically, oops, I have to select it first. I guess that would help. Yes, you have to select the item first and then change the dimension you want. And I want this to be 5 1/4. I'm going to hit apply, and then it's going to resize the entire image to the dimension that I want. If I were to, let's just Control Z out of that. If I were to leave this lock unlocked and I changed the height, it would squish it down and it would not change the width. So let me Control Z back out of that. Let me make sure that that lock is locked and change the height to 5.25, hit apply, and that automatically will change the size of it. Now, if I were to place the file right here, I can do that, but I tend to like to move or rotate the file cut so I'm actually maximizing the most amount of media that I'm not, the acetate paper, so I'm not wasting. So I'm going to rotate this on its side, and I'm going to do that clockwise 90 degrees. And now the next thing I want to do is actually do a test run. So I'm going to use a piece of scrap acetate paper, and I'm going to place my cut file down towards the end, and I'm only going to cut this section right here that's in the white part. All of this down here will not be cut. And the reason why I want to do this is because you can use the test cut version in the send settings, but that only will cut a small square and a triangle inside. And what I have found is that sometimes doing that, you may get a perfect cut, but with this being an intricate cut piece, you might want to actually do a test version of the actual piece itself. So that's the reason why when I go back to my design here, I chose that I want it to be down here. Now what this also means is that I need to make sure that I put my acetate paper basically where I've got this laid out here. Now let's see here, this is going to be 1 inch above, so I'm going to need to put my acetate paper at least 1 inch above that mark line, or that mark line right there, and so the acetate paper is going to be right there. And I'm just going to put a little scrap there. This is just to test it, and I can see that I've got lots of areas where it can cut out full pieces, and I want to make sure that my settings are going to accommodate that. Alright, so let's go over to the send button, and this will show me where I've got the file set on the paper, and I keep moving it and it keeps zoning out on me. Okay, let me just move that right back there. So this is the little piece that I'm going to test with. Now I will tell you that I prefer to use the deep cut blade. It's not an automatic tool, so I always use tool number 2 with using the deep cut blade from Silhouette. And while I'm over here, you'll notice here it's asking for material, and you can scroll through here and choose something from here, but I will tell you that none of that actually matters because they're all just basically general guidelines. What I'm going to show you is the settings that I chose. The first thing we need to do is to make sure that this is going to be cutting in with the tool 2, which needs to be in blue. Right now it's set to tool 1. You could set it on tool 1 if you wanted to, but I always do it on tool 2 because that's where I have my non automatic blades. So I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to choose cut. Oops, I need to select it. Come on. And then hit cut. Alright, so that changed the color to blue, and that's my tool 2. You'll notice also that all of this down here is not being cut. Excuse me. all of this below is not being cut because that's not where the media is. So what I did here is I chose some tools here, or excuse me, some settings here, and I created the setting to go all the way to 33 for the force. I want this to actually push down pretty hard on that acetate. So I also moved the speed down, I think, to about 3. And then I did probably 2 or 3 for the passes, because the acetate's pretty thick and it's pretty hard to cut through, so I want to go through it maybe 3 times, 3 or 4 times, just to make sure that it has a clean cut. And then I hit it to the send button. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that to the send button, and we'll see what comes out on the other end.
Okay, so what we're looking at right now is the Cameo mat, and you'll see my little note that I've written up there that says it has missing edges, and that's because I'm pretty rough with this mat, and there are some pieces that are actually missing. So I decided to turn the mat upside down because of those missing pieces that are at the bottom of the mat if you're looking at the arrow. But I just had this little piece of scrap, piece of acetate that I put on the bottom left-hand side, and then I went to my Silhouette machine and then I loaded it. So that's normally the direction that you would have loaded it, but you can do it upside down, and I did that because I wanted to use that part of the mat because the other part was a little bit messed up. Hit the load button, but you'll see that acetate is on the lower left-hand side. What you're looking at right now is the machine going through the test run. Something that I neglected to tell you previously is that I set the deep cut blade to the setting, I think it was probably around 19 or so, and I just sat there and watched the acetate get cut through here. I'm going to actually speed up the video a little bit, and you'll see towards the end of this test cut that the paper kind of comes off of the mat, and I'll explain why that happened. So as I was watching the machine cut, I noticed that the paper was starting to pull up a little bit. I knew that was bad news. I figured it was because the adhesive part of the mat was worn and it needed to be sprayed. And so I pushed pause, and then I canceled the job to see if I could get the mat out of the machine before it did any more damage, and had to unload. And as you can tell right here, oops, I forgot to hit the unload completely. But as you can tell, the machine did do the cut. I think I probably had the depth maybe a little bit too deep, so I decided I was going to make changes to that. I also wanted to make some changes as far as that outline cutting around the stencil itself, and I'll explain why in just a second. But I was overall satisfied with the test cut, and I knew that I needed to make some adjustments on my settings when I did the actual cut.
Okay, with that last test cut, I realized a couple of things. One is that I don't want to have this outline cut at the same time as the intricate inner parts, because there's a chance that once that line is cut, the whole thing may pop up. And I also want to make sure that I respray my adhesive mat with some Pixie Spray, which is a product made by iCraft, and it's basically a light tack repositionable adhesive. So I'm going to do that. The other thing is I want to make sure that I cut this outline separate from the inner design. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go, first of all, I need to move the design fully in the area where the media is going to be. And in this case, that's the acetate sheet. And I position it at the bottom of the media mat because if I run this through and have it run through the pass and I don't unload the media, but I lift up the acetate sheet and make sure that all of these pieces are cut out, if they're not cut out, I can rerun the whole job and it'll cut exactly in the same spot. If I unload this media mat, the Cameo mat, and then try to reposition it in, it will not cut in the same position. So that's the reason why I put it on the bottom here as opposed to the top, because then I can actually lift it up and see what's going on, and it's harder to do that if it's at the top of the mat. Alright, so I'm going to hit the send button, and then I'm going to come here, and now, oops, actually, we need to separate our piece here. So I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose ungroup, and then I'm just going to click off. Now I'm going to go to the send button, and I'm going to click right here on the line that I want to deselect, and I don't want it cut with the rest of the design. And then I'm going to go over here and hit no cut. So basically everything else in that area is going to cut except for that outline. Now I've decided I'm going to change some of the settings, and I think I had it on 33 before for the force. I'm going to actually change that down to 30. I don't think I need just quite as much pressure on that. And then I also had this up to either 3 or 4 passes. I'm going to go down to 2. Again, I don't think I'm going to need quite as many passes, and I think the speed was at 3 or 4, and I'm going to just change that down to 2. I want it to take its time, particularly on these really small tiny details. Alright, so let's go ahead. I'm going to hit the send, and then we'll see what comes back.
Okay, for the purpose of the time wise, I've sped this up, and I think I actually cut out some of this video, but it took about 6 minutes to cut the final cut. And I did change the blade depth to about 17. It was around 19, and I did reduce that. And as we watch that come out, now it's finished with the cut, and it's unloading there. It's actually still connected to the machine, but it's given me enough room that I can lift up the stencil, and I see that a lot of those little pieces are already come out, and I try to lift them up, and I want to make sure that all of those other pieces are disconnected. So what I decided to do is I used my little scraper tool here, and that's just to try to get that those little pieces off of the mat, because the mat is sticky. I did put a little bit of the pixie spray down before I applied the acetate sheet, and so all those little bitty pieces are sticking. I need to make sure that they are all off of the mat in case I need to run this design back through the machine again, and that's why I have specifically not unloaded the media mat, and I am just sort of peeling up the pieces there and that sheet, and just sort of carefully going through and scraping out all those pieces. And as you can see, I'm kind of fast forwarding that because the process took me a little bit, and I took my time because I didn't want to rip the sheet and mess up the design. So I went through and I kind of poked a little bit, and some of those pieces were hanging on just by a little bit, and it was just sort of going back and forth, and using that scraper tool, and just getting all those pieces out. Some of them were little boogers because they were so stuck to the mat, but it's important to do that because if I were to run it through again, and one of those little pieces is below it, then I'm going to have issues with it getting a clean cut. And well, there's me moving the camera, but I used my stencil, my hand stylus tool, just to poke out those little bitty pieces and to help me a little bit more on that. And so basically that's all I'm doing, is just poking through and making sure. Now remember, I didn't cut the outline of the stencil specifically because of this very reason. If I were to pull that sheet up, then because of the outline that would have cut the entire piece out, then I wouldn't have been able to lay it back down on the mat exactly where it needed to go. And so I'm just, finishing up, getting all those little pieces out there and, laying it back down on the mat exactly where it was. And that's the reason why, again, I haven't unloaded it from the cutting mat.
Okay, now that the intricate inner parts of my stencil is cut out, now I need to go back and cut that outline out so then I can actually pull it from the larger piece of acetate paper and be able to use it as an actual stencil. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am already in send, and so remember the little tabs up here. Just want to make sure you're on the send tab. What I want to do is to select that outer ring. Actually, let's do this first. We're going to select all of it, and this will be easier if I hit the no cut for the entire design. And now nothing will cut, but if I can go back and select that outline and just choose that, now all it's going to do is cut the outline line. And because I did not remove the acetate, nor did I remove the medium mat from the machine is going to cut it exactly where it needs to go. And so we just hit send, and I had that on, I think it was about 30. Oops. And I did a speed of two passes. It should be plenty since it's a straight line. It doesn't take much. And I left the blade set at 17. I hit send, and then we should be able to pull that stencil right off the mat. Let's take a look.
So what we're looking at right now is the machine cutting the last 2 passes basically of that outline. I'm going to fast forward this part of the video. It is just basic simple forward straight line cutting at this point. So as the machine's done, it spits it out, and I'm able to take a look at it, and I'm going to peel back that piece, and it comes right up. There's a little place where it's still caught, but I just gently pull. So now we're going to actually make the card. I am using the stencil that I just created. I'm using the cut file that I got from scrapbook.com. You can actually download it for free until October 5th, I believe. And I'll put a link down below for that. I need to make sure that the stencils can stay in place, so I used my pixie spray here and just sprayed the back side of that stencil. And then I used my Tim Holtz glass media mat, and I put down a piece of Nina White paper and just basically adhered that stencil down to the paper. That pixie spray is a very lightweight tack spray, so I don't have to worry about it ruining the paper. And now I'm just taping down the card onto my glass media mat with some purple tape from iCraft. And I love this because it's also a low tack tape. And so I'm just going to tape it down onto my glass mat. I'm going to use distressed oxides, and here are the colors that I decided to use, and I was just sort of kind of putting out which order I wanted them to be in. I wanted to do kind of a rainbow look, and so I used the picked raspberry, the candied apple, spice marmalade, squeezed lemon, twisted citron, and then peacock feathers. So I just kind of put those back off to the side and started with the picked raspberry, which is one of my favorite pink colors. And I used a blender brush, and these blender brushes I actually got from Amazon. They're very similar to the life-changing brushes from Picket Fence, but I found them to be a little bit more or less expensive, and so they work just as well, I think. And so I placed the ink down on the mat, and I did that for a couple of reasons. One is that I like to have that little piece onto the mat that I can go back and forth from, because when you're blending these inks, sometimes you can get cross-contamination on your pads. So I try to limit that by putting the ink down on the glass medium. But as you can see, I'm just going down the page. I started with the picked raspberry, then I went down to the candy orange, and then the spice marmalade, and then using that squeezed lemon for the yellow, which is right there in the middle. Now I'm bringing in the twisted citron, that kind of green color, and just my blending it. And then this one right here is the peacock feathers. I actually decided last minute that I was going to add some purple in there, and so I used the wilted violet. And I'm trying to use different brushes per color, and that's because I don't want to get colors mixed up on the brushes. So that to me is the best option, is just to have a different brush for each color. And then once I was done with that, I just kind of pulled that tape up and was being careful not to tear the paper. Although this tape is pretty low tacky, I just wanted to make sure and take a little bit care with it. I placed that sheet down because I wanted to reuse that ink before, and I didn't want to get the ink on anything else, so I just put a piece of grid paper over there and pulled that stencil up, again being very careful, and that is what came off of it. So I've got that stencil I can use over and over again on lots of different cards. So now I decided that I was going to use my favorite things, rectangle framelits basically, and I cut out the perfect size there. I believe that particular stacked die was the 5 1/4 by 3, no, 5 by 3.5, and I just did this to kind of trim it off. I also like using those dies because it gives me an exact cut every time. Sometimes I find that when I put it in through my paper cutter, I don't exactly get it straight. And so that's why I decided to do that. I used some more of that purple tape just to, keep it in place. The die didn't move around when I ran it through the Big Shot, and as you can tell, it cut it out just perfect. And then I was trying to figure out what color I wanted to matte it with. And so I decided that I wanted to use a different color cardstock. And in just a minute, we'll see that. One of the things I like about using the My Favorite Thing stacked rectangle frames is that they have these nesting frames, and right here what I'm doing is trying to figure out the different backings I wanted. So I've got the size of my actual design, and then this particular one that I'm holding, I was figuring out if I wanted the black there. And so I decided that next frame matte behind the design, I was going to do it in black. And I believe this particular black is the Hero Arts pitch black paper. And I really loved that cardstock. It's very nice, very thick, and very sturdy. And so I used that one with the My Favorite Things stacked rectangle. And here I'm just, looking at the card and making sure that that black matte is what I wanted to use. I decided to use it, so I'm going to use my Gina K Connect glue. I like this wet glue because it's repositionable, and sometimes when I'm trying to get a card front exactly in the center part of another mat with not a lot of wiggle room. In this case, I've got 1/4 of an inch. I like that Gina K glue because it is really good for being able to kind of push it around and put it where you want it to be. I just love how the rainbow colors sort of pop against that black matting. So here I'm deciding which color in the Gina K Designs cardstock I wanted to use. I've got the Blue Lagoon right there, and I like that. It kind of matches that peacock feathers and the distressed ink. But then I also wanted to take a look at this lighter blue here that Gina K has. It is the turquoise sea, and I held that up against the black and the rainbow color card, and just to see if I liked that better. And ultimately I decided no, that it wasn't quite the matching blue-green that I wanted, so I ultimately decided I was going to go with the Gina K Blue Lagoon. Once I die cutted that the Blue Lagoon panel, I took a look at it one final time and kind of centered that up and made sure it looked all right. I decided I was going to use the Tombow Extreme Glue Runner, which is what I've got there. Actually, this is a Stampin' Up product that Stampin' Up used to sell, and so I still have the container that says Stampin' Up, but it's actually a Tombow product, and you can purchase it from Amazon. I really like that Extreme tape runner because it does hold really well. You do have to be kind of careful with it when you place it down, because if you pull it back up, it is going to tear the paper. But I do like it as a final piece because of all of that heavy cardstock on top of it. I think it really holds well, and it holds up to long-lasting, being able to keep that card. I decided to mount the card front on a piece of Nina White Solar Crest cardstock right there. It's the 110-pound cardstock that I got from Amazon. And I also used the Tombow glue to adhere that card front to that panel. Then I thought the card was missing something. There was a lot of white on the front, so I decided to kind of add some black accents. I used the Nouveau gloss drops, and I'm just being careful and putting little dots around the design in different spots. I had no really rhyme or reason, just sort of going through and figuring little spaces where I thought there were a lot of white space, and I just kind of added a little black dot in there. And so I did this, and when I was finished with it, I made sure to set it aside to somewhere safe, because I am known for placing it on my craft table and accidentally touching it, and of course then that ruins the card. So the only thing I think left to do for this card is to actually give it to somebody.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to create your own stencil for card making purposes with your electronic cutting machine, such as the Silhouette, or you could also use the same concept with your Cricut maker. I'm going to be posting the links down below where you can pick up the products that I used today to create this card. I hope I've inspired you to create your own stencil with your own cutting machine using a SVG file. Now don't forget, this Wednesday is October 5th, and that is going to be the World Card Making Day. So I hope that I've inspired you a bit to go out and make your own card. And don't just make your cards, please do send them. Make a card, send a card. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope it was helpful. Please do me a favor and do hit that subscribe button or that bell, and that way you get notified every time I upload a new video. If you have ideas for future videos, please do comment down below. Alright, take care. Life happens. I comment. Stamp me some love. Bye-bye.